Hi, I'm Bridget. Welcome to my kitchen. Some of my favorite speedy meal ideas are kabobs. Kebabs, skewers as we sometimes call them. They cook quickly and are easy to cook in the oven or on the barbecue. Today I'm sharing two family favorites along with my answer to vegetable kebabs, an oven-baked ratatouille. There's something festive about kebabs, or fun anyway. My kids have always loved food on a stick and I'm right there with them. I love how cutting your meat and fish into pieces helps it absorb the marinade, but it doesn't have to spend a lot of time in the marinade to take on loads of flavor. So don't feel that you need to prepare these recipes hours in advance. Before I introduce the kebabs, let's get the ratatouille in the oven. Ratatouille is a big name for such a simple dish. It's just a pile of vegetables tossed with herbs in a marinade and baked in a slow oven. Baking ratatouille in the oven keeps it from going to mush, which is what often happened to me when I made it stovetop. To begin the ratatouille, we're going to make a simple marinade. 1/3 of a cup of olive oil. Into that, I am going to whisk in a tablespoon of Dijon mustard. And it's important to add these in this sequence because we want to make sure that the mustard is fully blended into the olive oil, because we don't want lumps of Dijon to get stuck on our fresh herbs. Next, we'll add 4 cloves of garlic, pressed or minced. You could chop them finely. I'm going to press mine in a garlic press. This marinade really offers a lot of versatility. It doesn't need to be as garlicky as this if you don't want it to be. I know this is seeming very garlicky, but really with all of the vegetables that we're going to be tossing this with, the garlic flavor won't be overpowering. Next, we're going to add a whole lot of fresh herbs. About 1/4 of a cup of fresh parsley, and minced or chopped as finely as you can. Now remember, if you don't have fresh herbs, you can always substitute dried herbs. And the ratio to remember is 1 teaspoon of dried herbs is equal to a tablespoon of fresh herbs. So the parsley. Then we need 2 or 3 tablespoons of basil. Now I'm just going to kind of shred the basil because it's a much more tender herb. So I just rolled the leaves up and sliced them so it ends up being kind of in strands. And then we're going to add a couple of tablespoons of oregano. And finally, a couple of tablespoons of fresh thyme. This smells beautiful with all these fresh herbs, very aromatic. I just rinsed these herbs in water and patted them dry with a dish towel. The occasional stick from one of the herbs isn't going to be a problem because it will soften a lot as it cooks, because this dish is going to be in the oven for the better part of an hour. And I'm just going to add a generous pinch of salt and a lot of freshly ground black pepper. Just go on your own palate, depending on how much heat you like. But this is probably 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. Now we'll set that aside while we start to chop all of our vegetables. So now we have a whole pile of vegetables to chop. In this mixture, we're using red onion, zucchini, a couple of different colored sweet peppers, and an eggplant. I'm going to cut the onion into chunks rather than slices because I want lots of texture with this ratatouille. You could use sweet onions for this instead of red onions, or you could just use regular white cooking onions. It's just I love the color of the red onions, especially in the finished dish. You're going to love how colorful it is. I chose the smallest Italian eggplant that I can find. I want to have eggplant in my ratatouille, but my family isn't wild about eggplant. So I'm just going on the lighter side. But if you really love eggplant, then choose one of the great big fat ones at the grocery store. I'm cutting these into 1/2 inch, 1 inch cubes. So this eggplant is going to get nice and soft because remember, this cooks for the better part of an hour in a slow oven. Next we'll do the peppers. And again, I'm going to slice them into chunks because I want to have as much of a uniform size as I can among all of the vegetables. Now, these are all fairly soft vegetables, so they're still going to cook pretty much at the same rate. It's not like I've got some root vegetables tucked in here that are going to need a lot longer. This ratatouille is the most versatile side dish. It goes with fish, it goes with chicken, it goes with beef, it goes with vegetarian dishes. You can eat it hot, you can eat it cold, you can eat it room temperature. Leftovers can be tucked into an omelet. There are really all kinds of uses for it. I know this looks like a ton of vegetables, and it is. This serves about 8 people. But remember, when you're baking vegetables, they get a lot smaller. So we are going to be left with probably half as much once this ratatouille is cooked. But I have divided it into 2 bowls because I want to make sure that everything is well coated with our marinade. Already it's looking beautiful now that the vegetables are shiny thanks to the oil coating. I've lined my biggest cookie sheet with parchment paper. Now if you don't have a jumbo cookie sheet, you can just spread the mixture between 2 cookie sheets. But lining them with parchment paper is very helpful because we're going to toss this a few times during cooking and we don't want our vegetables to stick. This will cook at 300 for 40 minutes to an hour. And I'm going to toss it a few times during the cooking. Our first kebabs of the day are herb marinated chicken skewers. This is an old family recipe from my mom and an enduring favorite. It's the kind of dish you ask for on your birthday. For the marinade, we're going to start with about 2 tablespoons of diced onion and 1 clove of garlic. And then a heaping teaspoon of freshly grated ginger. Now with the garlic and ginger, you can play around with the quantities if you want. You can make this sauce a lot stronger in flavor if you'd like to add more garlic and more ginger. To that, I'm going to add 1/4 cup of soy sauce and 3 tablespoons of dry white wine. Along with the wine, we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, freshly squeezed lemon juice. So depending on the size and juiciness of your lemon, it will probably be the better part of a whole lemon, like 3/4 of a whole lemon. And again, it doesn't matter if you have a little extra or a little less, because This marinade is very forgiving. Next, we'll add a teaspoon of an Italian herb blend or Mediterranean herb blend. This is a Greek herb blend, but often I'll use an Italian blend. And 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And finally, lots of freshly ground black pepper. Now that the marinade is mixed, I'm going to prep the chicken. Now this recipe, or the marinade recipe, is great for 4 to 6 chicken breasts. And I'm going to slice them into strips because I find strips a lot easier to thread onto skewers. When I used to use cubes, I found that they would roll around a lot. Today, the chicken is just going to spend a few minutes in the marinade, but if you wanted to prep this ahead of time, the chicken could actually go in a Ziploc baggie or a bowl in the fridge with the marinade overnight. And I'm going to put the chicken right in the bowl with the marinade. Toss it around. I'm going to put this in the fridge to chill while we get going on our second kebab recipe. While the chicken marinates, let's mix up the teriyaki salmon. Teriyaki sauce is such a crowd pleaser. There's something about that sweet and salty combo that is irresistible, and it goes so well with salmon. In this version, molasses replaces most of the sugar, and it gives the teriyaki sauce a real depth and flavor. We're going to start with 1/3 cup of cold water. Into that, I am going to whisk in 3 teaspoons of cornstarch. I want to make sure there are no lumps in the cornstarch before I add the other ingredients. 1 tablespoon of brown sugar and 1/2 cup of soy sauce or tamari, the gluten-free version. I've got 1/3 cup of cider vinegar, apple cider vinegar. It gives the sauce a really beautiful flavor lift. We'll add 3 tablespoons of molasses. You can really play around with the flavor profile in this recipe. If you want a little less molasses, you can just replace it with brown sugar. And the recipe calls for 1 clove of garlic, but you can always add more if you prefer. Another flavor enhancer is a teaspoon of toasted sesame oil. It has a beautiful fragrance and lots of flavor, but it is optional if you don't have any. And finally, I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of freshly grated ginger. To keep your ginger from going soft in the fridge, you can always store it in the freezer, and grating it from frozen is really easy. Now that all the ingredients are combined, we're going to bring it to a simmer on the stove. The ratatouille has been in the oven for about 30 minutes, so I'm going to toss it. It smells wonderful already with all those herbs. And see how it's already reduced so much. And it's only half finished cooking. I'm using a rubber spatula to toss it because I don't want to crush any of the vegetables, especially the softer ones like the eggplant, and then the zucchini will soften quite a lot also. While we're waiting for the teriyaki sauce to come to a simmer, I'm going to slice the salmon fillets into strips, and that'll make it easier to thread them onto the skewers. Now this teriyaki sauce is delicious just brushed on salmon fillets or on salmon steak, so you don't need to use it with skewers. Now that the teriyaki sauce has come to a simmer, I've set the timer for 3 minutes, and I'm going to stir it constantly as it thickens. Now, I might not need the full 3 minutes. I'm just going to judge the thickness of the sauce. I'm going to put the teriyaki sauce in a bowl to cool because we'll only use half of it with the salmon, and I want it to be cooled quite a lot before I toss the salmon with it because I don't want it to start cooking the fish. Our salmon is only going to have a few minutes in the teriyaki sauce before we cook it, but still you'll find that it imparts a lot of flavor. But if you have time, you could give the salmon a good half an hour or an hour in the teriyaki sauce. While the teriyaki sauce cools a little bit, I'm just going to get the salmon back in the bowl. I'm using wooden skewers, and because they're wooden, I let them soak in cold water for half an hour. I like to put different amounts of chicken on my skewers, and that way people can choose the serving size that they want. They can choose a large skewer or 2 large skewers or just 1 small skewer. Over the years, I've used this marinade with salmon and tofu. It tastes delicious with all different kinds of protein. If you don't have skewers, you can cook these chicken strips in a dish. So take the chicken out of the marinade, shake it off a little bit, and then just lay it in strips or on a cookie sheet and bake it at the same temperature. We're going to broil these. I've marinated the salmon in half of the teriyaki sauce, and the other half we'll save to serve alongside. The ratatouille is cooked and has a lovely texture. The vegetables aren't too soft, they still have a bit of texture to them. I'm going to cook both the chicken and the salmon side by side on a rack on a big cookie sheet. Now the salmon will probably cook faster, but I'll keep an eye on them both. I've set the oven to broil, and these will take about 10 minutes to cook. But as I said, I'm going to check on the salmon earlier. I almost forgot, at the halfway mark, we're going to want to flip these. So, well, it'll help them cook more evenly. That's for sure. And the salmon is cooking a little faster, but not a whole lot faster. They'll be nicely browned on both sides now. The salmon is ready, so I'm going to plate those skewers, but I just want to take a look at the chicken to see how much longer it's going to take. And really that will only have another minute to go after I get the salmon on the plate. This kind of meal looks beautiful laid out in a big spread. So serve it family style, and then everybody can choose the portion that they want. These are really ideas for 2 separate meals. The ratatouille goes beautifully with the salmon and the chicken, so you can choose one or the other, or you can serve both. Enjoy! Thank you.